Hello and welcome back to Aaron's Games. I'm Aaron and this week I'm taking a look at my newbie DM rules requests. Okay, so this week I'm going to go back and look at my list of rules requests that I wrote shortly after first becoming a DM. But before that, I'm going to talk about Xadrum and their new series, Maybe Movies, a kind of whimsical discussion of what could have happened if movies were different somehow. They've just released episode 7 on Friday just gone with a spooky twist, so definitely check them out. Head over to the link in the description below. When I first started playing Dungeons & Dragons, I decided to be a Dungeon Master first, and after a few games of play, I wrote up a list of rules requests. I haven't actually looked at that since I first wrote it, because I don't tend to use them very often, but I thought it might be fun for me to look through them now and then talk about them here on the video. So I've got them on the screen just below the camera there. So the first set is Zoom considerations. Obviously, with us being in lockdown, we couldn't play in person, and we still can't play in person really if we're being conscious to safety restrictions. I certainly don't want to be mixing with people indoors as much as can be avoided. So the first few are considerations for using Roll20, and generally on Zoom, which is what I used to use for Dungeons & Dragons. I've recently moved over to Discord because it gives you much more control over things like music and being able to whisk people over to private channels if you need to. So please be patient with discussions and try not to speak over anyone, particularly the DM. Yes, that's very important. I do sometimes struggle to get a word in with my players. I'm a very meek person in general. I don't like to interrupt people when they're talking, so I do find it very difficult sometimes to say anything. So that's a consideration. I don't think any of my players take notice of this. If they want to say something, they're going to say something, which is fine. I don't really have a problem with it. As I say, I'm a very meek person. I'm used to not being able to talk in a conversation, just kind of stand there and listen. So when I'm playing Dungeons & Dragons, I just wait for a lull in the conversation and then I continue. Usually the players realise that I'm trying to tell them about monsters or a room they've just entered, etc. Next, you will not be able to move your tokens. Instead, use the ping or arrow/ruler tools to indicate where you would like to move to if needed. Please do not draw on the maps. Yeah, so I've changed that one slightly. So originally I was a bit kind of control freaky, not wanting people to move their own tokens. I didn't trust them to stay within their movement limits. I've since relaxed that. I think all of the players in my games are allowed to move their own tokens, so I've kind of relaxed that rule because it's fine, and if people move beyond where they can see, then I don't have paid Roll20 at the moment, so they can't move around to any areas that I haven't revealed without not being able to see anything. So I've kind of relaxed on that one, which is good. Next up, if too many people are speaking at once, the DM will signal with a hand in the air. Please stop talking immediately if you see this. I will then request everyone use hands to show they have something to ask, and I will work through them individually. Yeah, I haven't actually had to use that one. Players are usually quite good at not talking over each other, and if they are, then I'm pretty good at working through individually, like, okay, you're next, etc. Yeah, so that one doesn't tend to get used now, which is good. Players will need to manage their own character sheets and stats by any method which they choose, but should keep the DM informed of any pertinent information at all times. That's a very important one. I like to know what characters' abilities and powers are. I don't like to be surprised in-game. I don't like to be surprised in general, to be fair, but I don't like to be surprised in-game when someone just suddenly whips out something that they haven't told me about. Generally, my players are pretty good at that. I've had a couple of one-shots where people have tried to sneak things under the radar and then suddenly revealed them at one point, which is not, you know, we rolled with it, but it did make me really frustrated because I do request all players to show me their character sheets in advance. I'm not trying to game against the players. I'm not one of those DMs who think it's players versus DM, but I just like to be informed of everything that the players can do so I can give them a reasonable challenge considering their abilities. If they've got a particular ability that will make an encounter really easy, then I'm going to change the encounter so it's not so easy. I just want D&D not to be a breeze, but I'm not trying to kill my players, much as they might think otherwise. And then finally, in the general considerations, you may roll using physical dice or virtual dice, whichever you prefer. That still stands. My new players a couple of them tend to use Roll20 for their rolls, which I really like, especially with the animated dice on the screen. That's nice. But a lot of the more longer term players and some of the new players prefer to use their own dice, which is fine. I have recently come up with an addendum to this rule, which is that if you're rolling physical dice, I would expect your rolls to be called, as in I rolled a 19 plus 4 equals 23, for example. Not just saying 23 to hit. That's a new one for me, so I'm going to be incorporating that into all of my games going forward. Some of the games that I'm playing will be enforced to roll by Roll20 just for the sake of fairness, because it's going to be a lot of people playing at once, and players versus players, in fact. The reason for wanting the cooled rolls is to go in hand with having all the information on hand. There are sometimes runs where lots of high numbers come up in a row, and like saving throws and constitution checks and things like that always seem to get passed. So I just want to see, like, I've got no problem if the rolls actually are those rolls. I just want to know what they are so I can know that that's where the character is, this is what their abilities are. And also, if rolls are generally quite high, then there might be something wrong on the character sheet. So it's just good for me to know whether how the roll breakdown works. Okay, and then we come on to the more specific rules, clarifications, and requests. God, I'm such an asshole. In big bold letters, number 1 here, metagaming, brackets, i.e. using knowledge your character would not have, is strictly forbidden. You must always balance your actions against what your player would know or not know. Warnings will be offered, further metagaming will be punished in a manner the DM sees fit. Metagaming is a big no-no in the game. If you know something as a player that your character wouldn't know, for example, something on the map, like the name of a house on the map that happens to be labelled, or the fact that there is a monster 3 or 4 rooms across from the dungeon from where you are, your character wouldn't know that, but your player does. So metagaming is acting on that information, and I don't like it. In any of my games, I don't like metagaming. It's not too bad, I have to say, with all of my regular players. I did play a one-shot where there was a lot of metagaming happening from one player in particular who was new to the game, so, you know, perhaps hadn't settled into the expectations of it, even though I'd made it very, very clear in our pre-game chats. But metagaming was pretty extreme, to say the least. And warnings were given, and then the character got struck by lightning, and then the character was knocked unconscious, and yeah, it wasn't really a good time for me. I got very frustrated, because metagaming is a way of making the game easier. Some players don't like the challenge, and I think that makes for a very boring game. If there's no challenge, there's no fun, in my opinion. So yeah, metagaming is strictly forbidden at my table, and I don't take kindly to it. As I say, recently I haven't really had any issues with metagaming, and the times where it has come up, the players are generally respectful enough to say, that was metagaming, I'm not going to do that anymore. So that's nice. Okay, HP values. You should not discuss values when talking about health. If a healer asks how people are, as in do they need any healing, you should describe how your character is rather than using a number of hit points. Obviously you can track HP amongst yourselves, but for immersion, please do not let your characters talk about HP. This kind of links hand in hand with metagaming in that your characters in this world of Dungeons and Dragons would not know their own hit point values. Like, I don't know how healthy I am on a scale from 0 to 100. Just, you know, no one does. So I don't like it being discussed that way in the world, in character. Sometimes, as a DM, I will ask the characters what hit points they are on. Roll20 has generally negated the need for me to do that, which is nice, as long as the players are updating their tokens with the hit points correctly. But sometimes the DM just needs to know that, and if the players want to complain, I'm sorry, that's a DM thing. I need to know what hit points you're on for a variety of different reasons, including wanting to keep you alive. Then we have spell components. I'm not hugely bothered by material spell components when casting, unless that component is something significant like a diamond or something with specific value. Verbal and somatic components will always be considered, however. Yeah, so this still stands. I'm not a huge pedant in terms of spell components, like you need a tiny little grain of dust, or you need a carrot, or all the wonderful things that you get with spell descriptions. I don't really mind. I figure that arcane classes and druids and clerics and such would have those things on them anyway. I'm not going to be pedantic to the point of saying, well, you have to gather some dust from around here. Like I say, if it's something specifically named, like a gem that's worth 1,000 gold pieces, then yeah, that will need to be considered, because those are there to kind of restrict how many times you can cast the spells. But in general, if you need a drop of water, I'm not going to make you describe pulling out a little vial of water and getting your drop, because it just slows things down, and I think it's not really necessary. With regards to verbal and somatic components, though, those are always considered. So if someone has cast silence, anyone in the zone of silence cannot use spells that have a verbal component, because they can't speak them. Similarly, anyone who is paralysed can't use the somatic components of spells, because they can't move to do them. So, there are considerations like that. Using inspiration dice. You can choose to use an inspiration dice, if you are given one, after you have made any roll, but it must be before the DM has announced the result of your roll. If you roll low, make it clear that you're going to add an inspiration dice and then roll that too. If the DM starts describing the results, it's too late to add inspiration. Yeah, that should be a no-brainer, really. If you've rolled your dice and given the result to the DM and they've started describing the result, and then you say, oh, I have inspiration, can I roll again? No, it's too late. By that time you've declared your result. If you're going to use inspiration, whether it's DM inspiration or bardic inspiration, you need to do it before you announce the result of your roll. So roll, if it doesn't look like it's going to be high enough for what you expect you're doing, roll your inspiration dice and add it on. You can add it, you can say it like that, you can say I'm going to roll with inspiration, and you roll again for advantage, or I'm going to use my bardic inspiration dice and roll that to add that on. As long as you don't give your final total to the DM before you do that, you're fine. Now coming on to a bit of a contentious one for me, which is combat discussions. So please limit your discussions in combat to things that could reasonably be said in a short space of time. Full tactics should be discussed in advance of a battle, not during. And, crucially, you also have no sway over what other players choose to do. You must not offer suggestions or tell anyone else what to do on their turns. So addressing that last point first, which is a great order to do things, I hate being told what to do when I'm a player. I have been in a few groups where other players think they can tell me what I should do, or describe the situation in terms of, oh, he's over there, he's low on health, go and get him. No, I'm tracking the battle myself, and I'm coming up with my character's tactics. I do not want anyone telling me what to do. And similarly, when I'm running a game, I don't want players to be telling other players what to do next. It's just not cool. Let players decide their own courses of action. If they say they don't know what to do and are asking for advice, then that brings us on to point one, which I'll get to in a minute. But if you're just unsolicitedly, is that a word? If you're offering unsolicited advice, it's annoying, and it doesn't make you look cool, it makes you look like a dick. I hate being told what to do. Oh, you could cast this spell and reach it. Yeah, thanks, I know that. And actually I go so far as to say, if anyone does tell me what to do, I'm going to do everything I can to not do what they've suggested. Don't tell me what to do, it's annoying. Going on to the first bit. I don't think that players should be having full-blown conversations in the middle of combat, describing where things are, deciding what to do, talking about what damage they've taken, what damage they've given, etc, etc, etc. It just shouldn't be happening. Like I say, I go with the rule of you have a limited time in combat. Each combat round takes 6 seconds, so you should only be able to say a few words, maybe a sentence at most. This is where my players disagree. We have had long conversations about this, saying that they would like to feel free to talk about anything they want during battle, and in terms of players feeling anxious about decisions, which I totally get. I get anxious about decisions as well. It does still frustrate me. It really does. We've kind of reached the agreement that they're allowed to discuss what they like in battle. If it comes on to the point of metagaming, then I'll start to step in, but otherwise their characters can chat as much as they like. they figure that because they've spent so long together, they would know how each other are thinking, and it kind of we've operated under a kind of a time stop mechanic in that they can do that. One player has a lot of spells at his control, and he does sometimes like to say, "Oh, what should I do? I'm thinking about what spell to cast, etc., etc." And it does wind me up a little bit, but they're great players and they are really good at the game and they're really enjoyable to play with, so I kind of let them get away with it. And then in the other circumstance, I've got a group of new players who've recently just finished Lost Mines of Phandelver, in fact. But I kind of relaxed the rules a little bit for them because they're new players. I want them to get the feel of the game before we start getting really extreme and into the restrictions. So yeah, I mean the rule still stands in my view in terms of combat discussions. I don't like to have conversations in battle, and if I'm a player character, then I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to get involved. But we've kind of reached that understanding with my group, and that's fine. Next up, conditions limiting speech. If you are unconscious, asleep, silenced, or any other condition that affects speech, you are expected to roleplay this and not talk. You cannot use this as an opportunity to aid or advise other players, as previously discussed. And this is kind of one of my homebrew additions, saying if your character is killed, you may choose one of the remaining players to haunt and offer them help or advice using the whisper chat function on Roll20. I've only actually had that happen once in one of the one-shots that I ran. In fact, the first one-shot that I ran, I randomly generated a dungeon and didn't really know what I was doing in terms of encounters or traps. The wizard who up until that point had been really good at checking for traps on doors, didn't check a door for traps, opened it and unleashed a flame trap. Now, I rolled the dice and didn't consider that 69 points of fire damage would be enough to kill him outright, not even have any opportunity for death saves or anything like that. He was turned to ash immediately. And it was a bit like, But then I said that he could haunt one of the other players and help them, and he chose one of the other players who was newer to the game and helped them out. Great. It hasn't really come up in other games, but I would stick by the haunt rule. I think that's really good. But yeah, conditions limiting speech. If your character is asleep or unconscious or silenced, then they shouldn't be speaking. Going back to the combat discussions, I like it to have an element of realism in terms of the way they play. So if your character is dead, they shouldn't be then saying, "Oh, I'm dead, come and give me a potion," or something like that, Right, that wouldn't work. "I'm unconscious, come and give me a potion." Skill checks. Yeah, this is a big one for me. If a player has an idea for something to do, it should be their character which attempts it, not, "Oh, I'm not good at this, so maybe someone else should try a perception check." It should be, so someone else should do this, whichever skill it happens to be. I fully agree with this. If someone has an idea for something and they say, "Oh, can I look around for traps?" it should be them that does it. They shouldn't go, "Oh, why don't you do that because you're better at that, you've got a better modifier." It comes back to metagaming, which winds me up, but also characters don't do that. You don't have an idea and go, "Oh, I think I'm going to check for traps." You do it. It doesn't make any sense. So comparisons of modifiers really annoys me. The whole discussion on modifiers annoys me anyway, because it's just a modifier to a roll. You still have a chance of failing. If you've got a +4 modifier and you roll a 1, you're going to fail. If you've got a -3 modifier and you roll a 17, that's going to be a 14, which might still beat the DC. It's just, it's built up to be a very particular thing with players. Okay, you're going to have more chance with a better modifier, but it's actually not that much different. So yeah, if you've come up with an idea, you're going to be the one who rolls for it. Solo/group checks. This is a big one. If a player asks to do something which requires a skill check, it is not automatically a group check. You should not decide to do your own check of the same type at the same time. You can ask to assist, but only one other person can assist with a solo check, and only if the DM allows it. Group checks will only be requested if it could reasonably be expected to be a group check, i.e. you're all searching a room, in which case I will take an average of the results and compare it to the DC of what is being requested. Yeah, again, it kind of comes on to kind of metagaming. The whole point of rolling dice in D&D is to see how well your character succeeds at something. So if you say, "I'd like to search the room," your DM will ask you to make a perception check. "Oh, I rolled a 4. Damn, I can't see anything." That's not just you've failed the check, it's just that, you've rolled lower than the DC, but that's also saying your character actually isn't very good at searching at the moment for whatever reason. It could be that the room is obscured, it could be that they're distracted, but the dice are telling the story in that moment. So if someone then goes, "Oh, I've rolled a 4, and then another player goes, oh, I'd like to have a look as well, and they roll. No, because, you know, I mean, maybe in some situations you get to have a look as well, but someone at the front, make a perception check. 14. Oh, you don't see anything. No one else can make a perception check. No one else knows there's even the opportunity to make a perception check in game. The characters don't know. Just means you failed to see what was happening. And that's a story beat. You failed to see that dragon flying over the mountains coming towards you with its mouth open, ready to flame breath and you kill you all. Unlucky. But yeah, you shouldn't turn it into a group check automatically. Again, my players are generally pretty good at this. The new guys did struggle at first, but once they kind of realise how the game works, then it kind of settled down. So that's good. Check requests. Please, as much as possible, describe to me what you would like to do. I will then tell you what sort of role I would like you to make. So instead of, can I perception check the room? Please say something like, can I look around the room? Or if you are looking somewhere particular, can I search the bed? Often if you describe what you're trying to do well enough, the DC will lower, or I might not even ask you to make a roll at all. True. It comes back to the kind of realism of the game. I don't like players to talk about mechanics in character. So them saying, oh, I'd like to make a perception check is, you know, I don't really like that. If it's the player saying it, then fine, but characters in character shouldn't be saying, oh, a perception check the room. Like I say, if you're looking for something in particular, describe it in enough detail and you won't need to roll. So, I would like to search for treasure in this room. Yeah, you're going to have to make an investigation check. I would like to search the bed for treasure. You're going to have to make an investigation check, but the DC might be lower. Or, if you say, I would like to look under the mattress to see if there's any treasure there, you might immediately find that there's a sack of treasure underneath the mattress. Boom, I'm not going to make you roll for that. You know, the way you describe your actions really helps. The one thing which I struggle to rationalise is insight checks. It did take me a while to think about it, but the way that I would get around that in character is saying, I don't think he's telling the truth, or I think he's lying, something like that, and then your DM can ask you to make an insight check. Pre-rolling. Please do not just roll without asking anything. If you do that, your roll would become an automatic nat 1. I think that's fair. If you roll and say, oh, I've rolled 14 for stealth, you haven't even announced that you want to try and sneak, you know, no, nat 1. Or, oh, I've rolled a 16 to perception check the room. No, you didn't ask to do that. You might not have even been able to do that, you know. So I don't have any players who are guilty of this. It's just kind of me being really tetchy in advance and worrying about what could be. It will still come up in future if people do it, but I haven't had anyone that does it, so yay! Okay, another big one. Rule checking. The DM has final say on all rulings. Rules lawyering will not be tolerated. Yeah, this is a big one. I, as a still relatively new Dungeon Master, like to check all details. Because, A, it should be me who's making those calls anyway. I'm the DM, I'm in control of the game. If I want to run a rule slightly differently and you don't know about it, that's my decision to make. And B, I just want to learn about the rules. I've through playing with the group of experienced players and with the group of new players, they're coming up with situations that I've not encountered before. It's great for me to practice. I'm going to either go, oh yeah, I know that rule, there it is. Or, I don't know that rule, let me look it up. Or spells, I need to just clarify on the spell description on that one. Or, I know how that spell works, go ahead and make the save, blah blah blah. What I don't like, and it comes back to being told what to do as a player, is when players just make their own rules calls and do it in a disrespectful way. I do not mind people offering feedback or challenging a ruling that I've made. I don't mind that. What I do mind is people getting a bit shirty and disagreeing with the rulings that I've made. I do run things in a particular way for my own enjoyment of the game. Like, I'm not playing as Dungeon Master to be a control freak. I'm playing because I enjoy it. And I'm a player in the game too. So rules lawyering is frustrating. Generally my groups are not bad at it at all. It tends to be the one-shots that I've had where I've had guest players and things like that, and they're not familiar with my style and a bit thrown off by it. And when I'm playing as a player character, I don't like to rules lawyer at all. Again, it's kind of it's almost instinctive for me to think about the rules when it comes up, and I've got my DM screen which is constantly in front of my face, so I do look at rules and see what's what, but I don't like to challenge unless requested, and if I am going to challenge, then I will do it in a polite and respectful way, and if the DM makes a decision on it, that's cool. You know, that's your decision. I'm just putting forward my opinion of the rules. It's your game, it's your rule. You run it how you like. And finally on the list here, the rule of cool. So again, as I say, this was written quite early into my career as Dungeon Master. I am relatively new to D&D. Sometimes my judgments will not follow rules as written, and often I make decisions based on how cool the outcome would be. As a result, the game may play slightly differently to how you are accustomed. If you have any serious concerns or feedback, I will welcome it outside of the game. Oh, really itchy nose. And that's true. I do sometimes make rulings which are not rules as written, but because the player wants to do something really cool, I'm just going to let it happen. At the end of the day, the game is supposed to be enjoyable for everyone, DM and players. If something's going to be really cool and it's not quite in the rules, then it's going to happen. That's the way it goes. Comes back to that not wanting to be challenged as a DM. If I say something's going to happen, it's going to happen. I might sometimes go, yeah, f*** it, why not? But that's fine. Roll with it. I don't really have a problem with that in terms of the groups that I'm in. People playing one-shots with me might find it a bit challenging to suddenly go, oh, that's not how it should be. But it makes the game cooler in my view, so it's going to happen. So that's it. A lot of these things will probably be general expectations, and as players you might feel that there's a lot here that doesn't need to be stated, and probably you're right. But I just like to have things extra clear, and again, going back to the fact that I'm a bit meek, I like to have things in writing so I can just go, well actually, I did say this. Here it is, you know, not just me going, "Rrr." Do you have any homebrew rules for your own Dungeon Mastering games? As a player, have you had any experiences with Dungeon Masters having particular rules that you've liked or not liked? There are optional rules, which we could go into, but I'm not going to go into here because there's so many. What are your experiences of those? Leave a comment. Tell me what you think. If you disagree with any of my rules, great, you're allowed to do that. But let's talk about it, and you know, you might teach me a different way. You might improve my perspective of the game, which for me, I'm still learning, and I will always be learning. I'm in a couple of Dungeon Master only groups on Facebook, and every time a situation comes up, I'll look at it and go, oh, that's an interesting way to run that. There are a couple of rules that I'm going to implement based on feedback from those groups, and I haven't told my players about them yet, so I'm not going to talk about them here, but I think they're going to make the game fun. I hope they will anyway, and hopefully they'll agree. But at the end of the day, if they don't agree with the rules, then I'm not going to implement them, because as much as I want to run the game in a particular way, if the players aren't going to enjoy that, then I'm not going to run the game like that. It's a two-way conversation. I'm not stamping down and saying, this is the rule, this is how it is. There's a dialogue there to say, what do you think about this rule? I'd like to bring this in. What do you think about it? Blah, blah, blah. So I think that's important as a Dungeon Master to have that dialogue with your players. Anyway, I'm waffling now, so thanks for watching this video. Do follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, any kind of social media type stuff. Hit subscribe. If you press like on this video, it actually really helps me out quite a lot. If you don't like the video, press that as well, because it gives me some feedback on what you guys don't like. Leave me a comment on your rules and regulations and any experiences you've had with Dungeons and Dragons. And I'm running out of breath again, so I'm going to stop talking, and I'll see you in another video soon. Bye!